We did it. It's Friday. We got there. Today's KYJ is the letter J. So our first J word, it's a big one. It's juxtaglomerular. 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 Juxtaglomerular cells are cells in the kidney that release a enzyme called renin. And if you go back to your basic physiology, you'll remember the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, that little system that brings your blood pressure up when your blood pressure drops. It's also the system that contributes to hypertension as you start to age from sort of age-related degenerative renal stenosis. So renin is released from the kidney into the bloodstream, and then a whole chain reaction takes place, and ultimately what happens at the end of that is that your blood pressure rises. And we've done videos on that. You can find the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone cascade, but it all starts with those little cells called the juxtaglomerular cells in the kidney, sometimes called granular cells because they contain granules of renin. Juxtaglomerular cell. So the next word is jejunum. Jejunum. And jejunum is the middle part of your small intestine. So let's just recap our anatomy. We go from stomach into duodenum, then into jejunum, and then into ileum before it turns into the large intestine. So the jejunum is the middle bit. So your small intestine's about 20 feet long, 20 to 24 feet long. You know, we're talking 6 to 7 meters long. But the jejunum, that's kind of 2.5 meters right in the middle. There we go. Jejunum digests the very, very first part of your of your diet. So there's a lot of enzymatic action going on in there, and we start to digest some of our simpler compounds like simple sugars, any amino acids that have already been broken down to that point, jejunum, and as we turn fat globules in our diet into micelles to be able to absorb lipids, some of those lipids are absorbed. The jejunum is really important for the absorption process in those fast-acting oral drugs. So, you know, when you take a medication and it starts orally and it starts working within 10 or 15 minutes, almost certainly it's being absorbed from the jejunum. There we go, jejunum. What about jaundice? That's a common J word, jaundice. Jaundice is that yellowing that happens in your skin, and you get yellow whites of your eyes. And it occurs because bilirubin, or unconjugated bilirubin, is building up in your bloodstream. So let's understand how that works. First of all, red blood cells, they're born and die in about 120 days. And so at or around 120 days, when the red blood cell dies, it gets sort of broken into pieces, and parts of it are recycled. And so the heme, well, that becomes repackaged and that becomes new red blood cells. But the other parts of that red blood cell body, that becomes an unconjugated bilirubin, which is a sort of a yellowy green pigment. And it circulates and it goes to the liver, and the liver then conjugates it and sort of partially purposes it into making bile. But what if you broke down red blood cells faster than your liver could process them? Then that bilirubin accumulates in your blood and you turn yellow. And that's what happens in newborns when they have that jaundice of the newborn. But it also happens in people with liver failure. If I've got hepatic failure or biliary obstruction and I can't process bilirubin and I can't turn it into bile, or I can't pass that bile out, there is a sort of a backing up all the way back in through to the bloodstream, then of course that bilirubin starts to rise and I get hyperbilirubinemia. Too much bilirubin in the blood makes you yellow, and we just commonly call that jaundice. Junction. What about the junction? So the junction is an area of electrical excitation in your heart. It's located just underneath the AV node. So remember, let's recap the impulse. So the impulse starts in the SA node, it travels down to the AV node, through the AV node, and then it goes through the bundle of His. And inside the bundle of His is where we believe there is the junction. And it's inside that bundle of His, just under the AV node, that the junction can pace the heart if the pacemaker, the SA node, fails. So the junction paces the heart on average about 40 to 60 beats per minute if there's no impulse coming from above. We used to think that was the AV node doing that. And so we used to call those rhythms nodal rhythms. But now they're called junctional rhythms because we believe that it's coming from just under the AV node in an area referred to as the junction. They're probably the same place. Joint. What about joint? Joint's got a lot of meanings, but in the context of this series, a joint is the junction, the union of where two bones come together. Usually there's an articulating surface, and if there's not an articulating surface, there's going to be a very, very thin sheet of cartilage or connective tissue that holds those two joints together. It's either a cartilage or it's a ligament that holds bone to bone. Some joints move, like knees and elbows and fingers and toes, but some joints, they just don't. And so if you think about the joints between the bones that make up your skull, that's a good example of immovable joints. They're sort of bonded together with what's essentially called a suture line. So there we go. A joint is where a bone meets a bone. Now, if a joint is pushed beyond its range of movement, then it can slip slightly out of place. And this is referred to as a subluxation. If it's completely jumped out of place, if it's completely pushed out of place and therefore is non-able to be articulated, that's when it's called a dislocation. So if you push a joint out of alignment, it's subluxed, and then keep pushing it and it becomes a joint which is now, I just got distracted. I was going to say a joint that was dislocated. So subluxation first and then dislocation. Joint. Let's move on. It's one of the perils of being in a busy cafe, having breakfast. Currently in Brisbane, completing the last day of our 5-day rural and remote program. So I need my coffee. It came right in the middle of filming, so that was a bit awkward. Okay, well that's our J words. I didn't think we'd get there. There's not a lot of J words. And in case you're asking, vanilla cappuccino. It's got to be a vanilla cappuccino. Full cream milk. Don't muck with the milk. See you tomorrow.